我が心と行動に一点の曇りなし。すべてが正義だ。ドジャーン
Okay, there we go. Hey guys, sorry for the sloppy intro. I didn't get the video clip open before I started the stream today, and so I just had to kind of roll with it. But I forgot that it was going to show the clip that was already on there, and then that whole thing got messed up. So unfortunately, that didn't go exactly according to plan, but that's how it goes. So anyway, oh, and let's get lights on. Alright, sorry about that, there we go. As you can see, I'm a bit confined. I did not expect there to be a long problem with the intro today, but I have a reason, and it's kind of a good reason. It's not the best reason in the world, but it's kind of a good reason at least, and that is that I had some video clips that I really wanted to use. I was talking yesterday about reacting to a the debate. Yeah, it was a debate. But the interview yesterday that came up between Kamala Harris on Fox with Brett Baer. I watched it, and then I watched it again this morning from somebody else's channel that kind of broke it down, and I looked at it and was kind of like, you know what, that kind of is a more important and more timely and better kind of ideas for kind of proving what I was talking about than the debate is, because that one is more or less just about the moderators and them constantly interrupting. Then Kamala's answers to the questions. This one is the first interview where she's really been pressed when she's been giving those answers, and that is more the point I was trying to make. So I just figured I should do that. The problem was that I had to get the clips ready, and for some reason Vegas was acting up today, and I don't know why, but it just was like, if I didn't specify that it's a long story. If I didn't specify the type of video file that I wanted to use, and then didn't change the video clips I was uploading to the format I had chosen to start with, it usually converts to the type you put into the actual video timeline, and that's usually no problem. But that was not happening today, because every time I go to render, it would say it can't render unless you select a type. I even tried to manually put in MP4, and it still didn't work, so I had to restart from the beginning and then do it all over again. And so, anyway, that's why I'm late. So sorry about that, everybody, but hope I still caught you guys. Once again, thank you guys for showing up, and once again, thank you guys. Every day has been a surprise, and has been very exciting for me, very overwhelming for me to see. Once again, I know in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't seem like a lot, but it's been really a big deal for me, because I've never had a project where I've had even the numbers I have now. So, you can imagine me kind of recognizing that has been really, really exciting, and so I guarantee I'm gonna keep going. It's probably further late. I've been late every day this week. I'd be fired pretty quickly if I was doing anything else. But luckily, hopefully, you guys don't fire me quite yet, because I think the best stuff is definitely yet to come. But I will get it right. I just need to get into the habit of starting to do it. I used to have a little bit more of an instinct to save clips that I kind of recognized were important, but it's been a long time since I did that, and that was more out of just entertainment and making kind of compilation videos than making videos that I would be reacting to necessarily. So I guess it kind of makes sense, but it still sucks, because it's like, how do you do that other than getting what you need as soon as you can find it. And it usually takes me, I mean, the last couple times it's taken about half hour, 20 minutes usually to set up. But there's always been a bit of a hiccup, and first two times were about the streaming software, and then this time it was about getting the video clip ready. So the streaming software, I can safely say I got that part down pretty much, except for, well, I wasn't prepared today, which is why the whole intro clip was all messed up. But anyway, and there's one other thing. I know this is just kind of a side note, and by no means meant to pressure anybody. I'm just kind of pointing this out so that everybody knows. I know the PayPal is set up. I think it's only able to receive payment from somebody at the moment who also has a PayPal and uses that to give a tip if they try to, and it won't accept anything directly from someone just with a credit card or checking account or something. So I need to actually, because I'm on the basic account and not the business account type. So I'm gonna make sure that I actually finally get that taken care of today. I just didn't have time for the show, but I'll probably do that right after the show, so it'll be ready to go by today and tomorrow. But in case anybody has gone and tried and not been able to, that's obviously why. So, but like I said, no way pressuring anybody. It's enough just to be here and just be checking out the show. And once again, I know. It's rough out there, and every second counts. So thank you for choosing to spend some time with Frame Advantage. And one thing, I didn't have time for this either, so try not to slow bud stream, but today we have to deal with it. Anyway, so to the clips. So this is basically Kamala's first interview with a news organization that's not from the beginning going to be completely sympathetic and just doing softball questions that she's given ahead of time and are pre-approved by her. These are the lengths that she has forced, or her team has sort of forced the interviewers that she's been going through. They've had to agree to the questions they're going to ask. They've had to sort of agree to certain time frames, and sorry, distraction. Essentially, they have had to because like it's really always this, like that's it's like she can't go long. She can't go for like she definitely can't go like a full hour, and I think it's been like most of the time it's been requested to be like 20 minutes to 30 minutes, and like for a presidential interview for someone who got shoved in less than just a few months in advance and hasn't had much of a campaign like as far as road trips or stops or anything like that. I know she's doing some campaigning, but like one of her other abilities to read off a teleprompter, that one is one that she kind of has down pretty decently. But anything else, it doesn't seem to work very well. So the questions that she's been asked, that she is making sure that when they ask the questions, she knows what they are ahead of time, because she's probably been, rehearsing answers and is just trying to remember, what it is she's supposed to say. I think by this point she's probably got it down pretty good, because there is sort of an infamous, almost meme going around now that whenever it comes to a question about the economy and what she's going to do for middle-class Americans and lower-class Americans that are having financial difficulties, she always begins by going into this long-winded story about how, well, I grew up in a middle-class home, and da 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 da, da, and then she never says anything about what she's going to do other than hand out money to like just hand out money, which unfortunately, if you haven't learned the lesson yet that that's how we got into this problem, then you're not really fit to be in any position that is in control of government funds. I'm sorry, but you know, the first stimulus, everybody was very skeptical of it, but because of the pandemic, because it was such uncharted territory, everyone was kind of like, okay, I guess we kind of have no real objection against it. It'll probably cause some problems, but once the economy gets going again, then that should definitely help. And then people won't have any downtime where they're not spending any money because they're not working, and hopefully that makes it so that the because the idea of inflation and what was it called? Well, an inflationary cycle or stagnation or a serious economic serious economic situation for a country essentially comes about when there's too much money in the money supply and people are spending, but there aren't enough goods to keep up with that, or enough. People always say too many dollars chasing too few goods. I think that always kind of sounds a little too simplistic because it's not just goods; it's also services. So it's about people who have somebody coming out to do repair work or to install something, or goods and services in general, and the amount of money that employers have to spend, because employers are not only going to have to worry about their employees that they have already and how much money they're going to be spending on just them showing up, but the fact that they're going to need to be able to get there, so they're going to need to be able to put gas in their car, they're going to need to be able to put food on the table for them and their families, they're going to need all the necessities that anyone would need as an employee, and all those things are going to go up, including the business owners themselves, especially his or hers, because they're going to have to be buying supplies for the business, they're going to have to be buying everything necessary for the business and keep that up to date, and if it's something that they're not making money off of, just necessary items for just everyday needs of employees, that's not even something they're going to be reimbursed for. So, and that's a big problem, and that's another reason why people who just think handing out money is fine. Usually, those are people that are, they claim that they're socialists or whatever. It's like you do realize what goes wrong in these types of governments, right? Like there's a big issue here, and that is that it's usually for the idea that this is supposed to be this workers' utopia, and the workers are supposed to quote unquote control the means of production, control the businesses that produce, and all that. But, well, the problem there is that number one, it's natural for people to want to be in charge of something, so somebody is going to inevitably end up being a decision maker, because there are people who just aren't decision makers. I mean, there are people that won't, in any circumstance, won't just step up and take charge when they need to in every single I worked in a place that was involved in building automotive parts, like in particular suspension parts for cars, and so the machine shop guys, they would take charge of the machine shop. They knew what to do in there. That was all fine. If you just moved them into the retail part of the business for one day, I don't think they would be able to take charge of that like they do the machine shop. So, some people are really good at this, and that's why they're hired for that. But if they are supposed to be the ones in charge of everything, well, the boss essentially is the one who does that. But there's also another thing there that people just refuse to talk about, which is the risk factor to the business that is started, and that we all know about the businesses that were successful, but nobody really ever talks about the fact that it's only a small percentage of the businesses that are started in this country that last long enough to be that successful. There's tons of businesses that go under before anybody knows their name, and that happens all the time. And so, just that investment into a business, that's a huge risk, and that's all from the money of the people who own the business. And so, when people talk about, well, I mean, it's noble to want workers to be able to, get enough to be able to take care of their family and take care of themselves, and that's all understandable, but on a realistic level, you can't dismiss the fact that there is a specific talent that is in the area of entrepreneurs and their skill set, and workers are not the ones who have that skill set or that mindset or whatever it is that makes people, disposed to be entrepreneurs, and so you can't really have them be the people to take those financial risks because they either don't even have the money to start with, or they're not confident in the ideas that they have, whatever the reason might be. So in socialism and in real socialist societies that are all about empowering the worker, they really just dismiss the whole idea of entrepreneurship entirely and look down on entrepreneurs in general. And that was one thing about this country that was always very important and made it so successful, was that we did recognize how it was essentially invaluable, because there's a reason Elon Musk was so valued by the left until recently, and now is valued by people that still don't put that much stock into the fact that what political candidate he supports, and just the fact that he is an incredibly successful businessman. And that is because he is not only incredibly intelligent, but he's willing to go out on a limb and risk his financial success on the ideas that he has. And especially right now, when the political environment is the way that it is, and not just that, but the regulatory environment is so incredibly out of control, to the point that he talked in an interview with Tucker Carlson a while back about how regulations are there's so many regulations just for the automobile industry that if you tried to print them all out and stack them up, they would end up filling up, and they're in a pretty decent sized room. He said they would fill up a room, and that's just for America. For Europe, there's a whole nother room that would be full of the regulations for that car company there. So that's out of control, on top of the fact that the amount of money we need to spend just for the capital to invest in the business in the first place, and everything you need up front, that's a huge cost. So what I'm getting at is that that's not nothing, and that's not something that should be dismissed as unnecessary or undeserving of the actual cost to those people, as well as you want to talk about like people who end up like constantly freaked out, they can't even sleep, they're worried about their future, they're worried about the ability to take care of the essentials for them and their families. That's the kind of business or that's the kind of position, I guess, or the kind of career path where you would most certainly be constantly paranoid over, unless you have just the right kind of mindset to where you remain optimistic enough and self-confident enough that your product or your business is going to be a success, and that's a rare kind of person. So it's a shame that it's not more talked about, or at least not something that people are as aware of as because it's definitely a good thing, like I said before, that people do get concerned over people who, especially work with their hands, do hard-working physical jobs, um, all the things that are particularly very demanding physical labor. Uh, it's great that people take the time out to recognize how difficult that is and that they should be acknowledged for it. But it's kind of sad that everyone just dismisses the business owners and the business creators that actually make those opportunities in the first place. And that's where, um, especially the modern day, the modern more populist right wing is sort of heading is that look, we want to empower everybody, um, and we want middle class and lower class people to thrive, but we also want the businesses that are successful and make products that people actually like. We want them to thrive too, because look, we're competing with uh, you know companies that are in places like China or um, in other countries that we may be friends with, may not be friends with, but in any case, we got so used to, as I discussed in the last episode with the Bush administration, we got so deeply obsessed with like global trade and global markets that we were starting to put the entire American American job market in a kind of risky state of business, because it's like, well, if you're trying to minimize costs to the point that you're only going to create manufacturing plants and give manufacturing jobs to lower wage workers in other countries, and you don't have to invest as much in the property or anything like that. That's not only really dangerous as far as the the workers and the finances for that business go, but it's also, in the case of certain governments around the world, dangerous that they would be gaining a foothold in the global market so heavily that, like right now, first time in my lifetime, people are talking about the dollar not being the world's general reserve currency. And to be honest, that's one of the only reasons why we are able to stay in the position that we're in and everything hasn't collapsed yet, is because generally when people and right now, I mean, especially China is making a serious power play, as well as Russia, to start using their currency, rubles or the renminbi, to be the reserve currency for the rest of the world. And if that were the case, and if the dollar wasn't used as the general form of transaction, America as a superpower would pretty much, that one thing would create a situation where America would basically stop existing as we know it overnight. Right? That would be the end of the country economically, and because of the way all of the lending market, the way it works in this country, that would essentially just decimate that whole process, to the point that if we weren't able to make loans or to borrow loans from other countries, it's a really crazy situation. But those are the things that people take for granted, or they're so dumb, even though they're political leaders in some way, shape, or form, that they don't even know about this. And that's even more scary, because wait, our leaders are good. So when going back to the pandemic and the first stimulus and not getting passed, the real problem, which this is what people don't really recognize, because they say, well, we got the first stimulus under Trump and the pandemic was going on under Trump. But yeah, that's true. And he made some bad decisions at the end there, although I would kind of say in that situation, I would understand when you got everybody yelling at you that you should do this, you should do that, or you're going to put people's lives in jeopardy because of this and that. There's definitely going to be so much pressure on you. You're going to make some mistakes. But lo and behold, he still made it to where at the end of his term, just before Biden was about to go in, it was more or less assumed, I think, by most people on the right and by most people in general that, all right, well, we're going to be opening back up soon, and things will be going back to normal soon, and then we can all get back to work. And if you remember, though, no, that's not what happened. We were encouraged, let's say, I'll just say forced to continue with the social distancing and you know, remote learning, remote work, working from home, and forced to wear masks, forced to vaccinate. There was, as I mentioned last time as well, there was the get vaccinated or lose your job if you are a business of 100 employees or more, and it's just like, and then on top of that, then they put out another stimulus, and then they put out another stimulus, and by that point, it's like, okay, now you're getting over the top ridiculous over this stuff. I mean, because look at all this money that's going out. This is like we're going to end up in a recession. That was the word I was looking for. And lo and behold, we end up in a recession. But then they say that, well, no, technically we're not in a recession, and that just is because they redefined what recession means. Even though the standard had been the same for years, and it's kind of what they did with the name for the type of research they were doing for gain of function research. Suddenly that also had a different definition, so it wasn't really gain of function research that was going on in China for in the Wuhan lab of coronavirus. That suddenly wasn't gain of function research, according to Dr. Fauci, according to everybody associated with Eco Health Alliance. It's just all just propaganda tricks and just ways to get people to say, oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess we're all right then. No, we're not all right. We're in big trouble. And then the real last sort of couple coup de grace were the bills that came out. There was first the American Rescue Plan, which did not rescue anyone, and then there was the Inflation Reduction Act, which didn't reduce inflation. So, once again, they had nice titles, but the majority of those bills were about the money going to Ukraine, and then Green New Deal garbage that was about more regulations about drilling on federal lands or public lands, or wherever they decided was illegal to drill this time, and just once again, none of this had anything. That's why whenever they talk about it, they say that bill lowered prescription drug prices for seniors by this amount. Okay, how is that with inflation reduction though? What does that have to do? That sounds like maybe senior medical price reduction act, but that's not exactly inflation. And don't get me wrong, it's like, but once again, there's an issue there because a lot of the things they put in the bill to do that are cumulative over time effects that aren't going to actually be able to be realized until like 10 more years or something like that. So even that wasn't something that, maybe there was some kind of immediate effect that was able to reduce the prices somewhat, but it most certainly wasn't the type of bill that was going to be an overall general inflation reduction for the entire country in the way that we all think of inflation and all were expecting that the bill was going to be focused on. And once again, that goes into the whole obsession with Ukraine and the fact that conflict in the first place was just completely unnecessary, which is why another thing Trump said over and over again, which I believe him on this, because he did have a lot of talks with both Zelensky, and with Putin during his presidency, he was on good terms with them as far as world leaders can be on good terms, um, especially in countries like Russia where we're kind of rival governments. Although I'm not saying anything nice about the government of Russia or anything. All I'm saying is that I've never understood why there's such a unique hatred for Russia among the elites in Washington, especially because we've never really. That I can't think of anything in my lifetime that was really, um, you know, seemed like something that was a hostile act of Russia towards the United States, except for maybe if you include their um, their sort of bot technology for influential advertising that is meant to push propaganda to help sway elections or to sway public policy or public opinion. Um, but to be honest, I don't think in a lot of cases that is even directly the Russian government itself that's behind it. It could very well be some group of activists in Russia that think that this is a good thing for whatever cause they're supposed to be fighting for. I mean, you have that ridiculous group in the UK, Just Stop Oil, the most not only useless but probably one of the most despicable groups of people I've ever seen in my life that literally go into museums and destroy historic works of art and then just sit in front of them with this message about how we need to stop using fossil fuels. They know nothing about fossil fuels. They know nothing about energy. They know nothing about what it would take to actually get ourselves to get off of fossil fuels and onto a different energy source. And they don't really care. They're just trying to promote a message. It's so important that we do this. And so they're bought completely into the idea that if we don't do this soon, we're all going to die. Okay, yeah, sure. It's fine to believe that, but why? Like, what's destroying? And then they'll give an answer like, well, these things aren't going to mean anything when we're all dead. Okay, well, what if we're not all dead? And then we're just supposed to forget about the fact that you destroyed this historic work of art that people have rightly been admiring for last decade or so, or not decade, last 100 years or a couple 100 years. Who knows? How long? And the last thing I see, I mean, they can't really do anything serious unless they really. I mean, if they did something here, I mean, I don't know. I think most of the world would turn against them. But the last thing they did was stupid. But they took this red and orange. I think it's just pigment, like the powder pigment that you would use to make paints with. I think that's what they use a lot of times because they'll run out onto soccer pitches, or they'll run out onto. Because we're talking about England here, they'll run out onto cricket pitches and they'll just throw this stuff up into the air and it just looks like this really bright orange powder. But I think it's pigment. I don't know exactly what it is, but it stains the hell out of everything, and obviously it'd be hard to get it off. But last time they did this at Stonehenge. They threw it all over Stonehenge, and once again it's like, okay, well, people are gonna have to clean it off of Stonehenge. But like, I highly suggest if you want to keep your asses attached to yourself, you don't do anything that would be permanently damaging Stonehenge of all places. Let's just say that's got a little more value than most of the other things you guys try to destroy or are successful in destroying. And the idea of that being for your cause, I mean, I think if you actually want to promote this cause that you seem to care so much about, it'd probably be a good idea not to do something Stonehenge. Anyway, I got on a long tear about all sorts of things there, but we'll switch topics now. We'll go straight over to the video clips I was talking about the interview. So, and there's not a ton, but there's a few I have that I got a lot of these from. By the way, just a shout out, YouTuber I watch a lot, Black Conservative Perspective. He's a YouTuber who is one of the groups that part of a demographic of people that is very much hated by the left, which is a black guy who is conservative. Larry Elder is one of the people who talks about this a lot, that they hate Republicans. They really hate black Republicans. So if because that's like almost an act of betrayal to leftists, that we're trying to help you, and we're trying to stick up for your needs. Well, I don't need your help. Well, then you're just a traitor. You are probably you got this internalized white supremacy, just like internalized misogyny, whatever excuses they use to describe why you can't be a black person, a self-respecting black man, and also be conservative. That just can't possibly exist. So, but anyway, that was where I got a lot of these clips. I think most of the clips. I think I got one from somewhere else, but most of these clips I think I got from his channel. Hey, either way, shout out to him, because he did all the hard work for me. Found the most important parts that going back and watching that interview. These are probably the best representative clips of the issues that I'm sort of talking about. And the focal point here is when you watch these, remember that what we're talking about here is we're talking about a person who's running for president, and we are less than 3 weeks away from the election, so less than a month away, almost 2 weeks away, and this is the first interview that she's done where they knew that Fox and Brett Baer were not going to agree to ask specific questions that were going to be pre-approved, and that they're not going to try to make this about softening the blow and letting her just filibuster and not actually answer the question. They are going to actually hold her feet to the fire and make sure that she answers the questions. And that's one thing that she's never done when it comes to the questions that even are the most important about the economy and about the border, and especially in terms of the border. She was for a while there, she consistently called it Trump's vanity project. Now she's hinted at the idea that we need a wall, and that's the last thing I would have ever expected in my life, is that now we need a wall. What? From the Democratic nominee for president, now we need a wall, between us and Mexico, which, it's a ploy. They're not going to stop bringing. Now, it would be interesting if they did put the wall up, because they still would be bringing people in by flying them in and using the CBP-1 app, which I talked about last time. But it's like, I guess that would be some kind of way to pretend like that. That's the only steps they ever take, is they do things that are going to improve the optics. Optics is a word that is, you'll notice over time that the left is very fond of using that as a talking point, and using that as a very important reason why you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, because the optics will be really bad. Well, that means that's because it is bad. But anyway, so hold on just a second. Let me get this video queued up, and we'll go over each one of these points as they come. I think the first clip is actually from the end of the interview, but there's a reason I have this picked out first, and well, you'll understand why in just a second. So let me bring that up. Here we go. And all right. Now let me get the. Okay, we're good. All right. So, like I said, this first clip I think is from the end of the interview, but I'm gonna kind of stop after each clip and kind of go into, maybe not after each one, but at least kind of make a point after each one about what's actually being discussed, in case you might not know what's being referenced. But anyway, so let's go ahead and get this off. So, is the volume done? Yeah. Okay. All right.
Madam Vice President, they're wrapping me very hard here. I hope you got to say what you wanted to say about Donald Trump. There are a lot of things.
There's more to say. I have much more to say.
There are a lot of things that people want to learn about you and your policies, and that's why we invited you here.
I invite everyone to go to kamalaharris.com. And you will see that I have 80 pages of policies that are quite comprehensive and should be accessible to anyone who would like to read them. And it includes what I intend to do about affordable housing, what I intend to do about small businesses, what I do
and that's why we invited you here,
our economy,
to see where you were in 2019 and where you are now.
America's military and ensure we have the most lethal and best fighting force in the world.
Madam Vice President,
and
they're giving me a hard rap here.
Well, I thank you for the time.
I thank you for the time.
It's good to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now keep in mind, when he says they're giving me a hard rap here, I originally thought he was talking about Fox News. They will, you know, when they have to get to commercial break or they have to cut a segment or it's time, you know, when they actually have to cut, they'll be talking about in, you know, the little earpiece they have, they'll be telling them, cut, you have to cut now. But no, he's talking about her staff. They're giving him a hard cut because he was asking questions that were starting to get a little too intense, and the answers weren't exactly, let's say, in the league of the type of answers that certain caliber of candidate would be giving if they actually, you know, knew what the right answer was. And not to mention that, as you'll see, they don't always reference their opponent, essentially, in every answer they give. They talk about, at least most of the time, they talk about their own plans or their own record or whatever it is that they're actually trying to talk about. They aren't going to every answer talk about what their opponent is doing. So you'll see that as this goes on. But yeah, that's it's an interesting marker. But yeah, so here we go. On to the next one.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have, and you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you
now,
just a number? Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a
an
rough
immigration
estimate of
system
6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the elite. Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish.
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
and they didn't bring up that bill. I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising,
okay,
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, man. Okay. So that is a perfect encapsulation. So first of all, she didn't answer the question. She never at one point ever said how many illegal immigrants came into the country. Not once. She never offered it at all. That never was something that I think she was ever going to answer, given the fact that Brett had to give her the answer. He talked about this after the interview when he was talking to other hosts at Fox, and he was saying that because Brett really is, I mean, you don't get it from this interview, but you can see it from other interviews he's done, from other debates he's been the moderator for, or any kind of big event where he's going to be hosting. He's by no means a guy who's extremely confrontational. He's not a guy who likes to interrupt, or is known for interrupting, or is known for being rude, or is known for trying to correct people. He usually he will correct when they're done speaking. Sometimes if it's an egregious way off the mark, but he does not do that very often. He's not at all, even though there's the stigma behind Fox. He's not at all really a partisan guy. At the bare minimum, he's not the sort of partisan reporter. And especially when you even compare him to the other people at Fox, he's very much very down the middle kind of guy when it comes to the reporting. Now, I'm sure he's registered conservative because just by his sort of personality and by some statements he makes in environments that are a little more informal. He's definitely not someone who's like, at the bare minimum, he's not someone who's like leaning left in today's world. Maybe if it was the world of like Robert Kennedy Jr. sort of Democrats, then maybe, but not at all for sure in today's world. And but even though that's the case, he's one of the few people on Fox that really, he's not a journalist that handles things in a partisan way. He handles them as professionally as he can, and yet this is the way that she has to handle an interview, because he's just asking a question about simple facts that, if you look at the history of the situation, you can find a clip very easy to find. Maybe if you need, I'll find it for you. Of Alejandro Mayorkas, that wonderful guy who should have been impeached, but the Senate decided no, we're not going to do that. We need him to let more illegal. To protect the border. But anyway, he'd done an interview not long after they took office, where he was saying the reporter was asking him, how many of Trump's immigration policies have you rescinded that were executive orders? And he was proudly proclaiming, Oh, there's so many that we couldn't even lay them all out here. It would take too long to go through them all. But we've rescinded so many, and I think the number came out later, something like 80 or 90 or something like that. Like, there was a ton. And that was because they absolutely hated the Remain in Mexico policy, the Safe Third Countries policy. They hated, essentially all of them, even the ones that had been in place long before Trump was in office, which is why they don't abide by the Secure Fence Act, which I think it was the first episode I did, as Chip Roy describing the one of the job descriptions of the Secretary of Homeland Security. But because they want people to come in, they want more people to come in, they're trying to do everything they can to avoid making sure the fences are closed. And one thing that that pisses me the hell off at this point is hearing comprehensive immigration reform. I swear, Democrats do not stop with comprehensive immigration reform. Comprehensive immigration reform. Well, first of all, Trump did more to close the border than any president in my lifetime, and he didn't need comprehensive immigration reform to do it. He did it by executive order, and he did it by just simply making sure that the countries of Mexico and the Northern Triangle countries that are part of the Central America, they would essentially act as places where if someone was coming to the United States and seeking asylum, now the idea, this is another part that's a big problem. The idea behind asylum is technically supposed to be if you are fleeing your home country out of fear of your life or because there is an act of genocide or an act of mass imprisonment or inhumane treatment of people based on their either their religion or their race or nationality, then you can go to a country that's next door to the home country, because essentially the idea would be that you're trying to escape that country. Not that you just decide a country along, well, I want to go to this one, okay. Because if you're really desperate to get out of your home country for fear of your life, where you're going should be theoretically the closest place that's not that country. But that's not what's happening here. As I said before, in one episode before, I talked about how they're coming from Africa, they're coming from China, they're coming from they're coming from just about every country that you can think of, where they have like every third world country you can think of, and countries that are essentially our enemies. A lot of people from Iran, a lot of people from Turkey, a lot of people from Gaza, a lot of people from Lebanon. And there's been, I can't remember what the number is up to this year, but it's at least over 100 people on the terrorist watch list that have been caught at the border trying to cross. That doesn't include people who were gotaways, meaning, in this case, when they refer to gotaways, there's known gotaways, meaning people they spotted on surveillance cameras or by some sort of device that tracks people coming into the country, but they were never stopped by Border Patrol, so we don't know who they are at all, even less than we would if they came in through the ports where they're supposed to come into. And we also don't know, anything about them in terms of, even the place they came from, because usually when asked where they came from, they usually will tell you where they came from, even if it is China or, one of the countries that's enemy country. And but the problem is, once again, that we should have something in place like we had before, where, okay, we'll hear out your claim for asylum. If you're claiming asylum, that's another thing. The cartels will tell these people, they'll let you in as long as you say you're seeking asylum because you're trying to escape your home country, but they don't know really what that means, but they just at least know that, okay, I have to say I'm seeking asylum. But then they'll sometimes say, like, well, I'm looking for work, I'm trying to find, I can't survive in my country because I'm not making enough money to support my family. That's not the point of asylum. You know, I'm sorry that your economic situation is really bad, and I feel bad for you, but, like, that's not the point of asylum. The point of asylum is if you are in immediate danger from your own government and you need to flee. But once again, why are you trekking it across the distance of about 5 countries total to make it to this country if you're just trying to escape a country you're being persecuted in? It doesn't make any sense, but we still will hear their claims out. They just have to do it by waiting in a country that's not America while we're reviewing their claim. Well, that's where the problem comes in, because this administration decided we shouldn't do that and went back to Obama's era of policy, which was catch and release, which means they, as I've talked about before, they stop them, get information that may or may not be true, and then release them into the interior. And even worse now, now they don't just release them in the interior, they release them onto a bus or a plane and put them on a trip to the state and city of their choice and just drop them off there. So it's gotten so out of hand, and it's obvious when you hear the numbers. The official numbers are something like 12 million total throughout the entire Biden administration, but including immigrants that were already here illegally, and people that are potentially gotaways and unknown gotaways, meaning people that weren't caught by any kind of detective device. Because you gotta keep in mind that even if though we have a lot of assets on the border, there's also reason. I'll play a clip at some point that Mayorkas has been making sure that they are not using all of the technology that they have right now to potentially catch everybody who is crossing the border, at least on some sort of detection device. He's not using all of it specifically to make sure that everybody trying to get in doesn't get caught and reported about. So those numbers aren't added. So there's a group of known gotaways and unknown gotaways, and then there's the people who went through the port of entry. And when you include all those numbers, including people who had already been here, you're looking at closer to 20 to 25 million people that are here illegally. Some people have, I think, put it as high as 30 million people in the country that are here illegally. That's a tenth of the population, I believe, of the United States that's here illegally. That's ludicrous. That's absolutely ludicrous, ridiculous, and there's not one other country in the world, not one other country on the planet that would be like, yeah, something needs to be done about that. No, they would be like, this is outrageous, we need to get these people out. But this government is just like, nah, well, how are we going to do that? We should just, let's just give them all amnesty. And that is the ultimate goal of this precious bipartisan border bill, which she'll be bringing up soon at least. But anyway, let's get back to the video. I just had to get that part out because now we're getting into the real juicy stuff where the BS starts to build up pretty quick. And you can see that when Brett wants an actual real answer, instead of him getting angry, she's the one that starts getting angry. So we'll continue this. So let's go.
Fixing a problem. And in this election, this is rightly a discussion that the American people want to have. And what they want are solutions, and they want a president of the United States who's not playing political games with the issue,
I hear you,
but actually is focused on fixing it.
6 Democrats voted against that bill. It would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it. These are the 6 Democrats. But more importantly, back to the original premise, Jocelyn Nungari Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were brutally assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Brett,
those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungare's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I am so sorry for her loss. Sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions.
So, I have to go off on this one because this is where things really start pissing me off. So, just first off, let me just say, Jocelyn Nungare, the first girl that was mentioned, that she was 12 years old. She was grabbed by two men, taken under a bridge, sexually assaulted, and essentially suffered for 2 straight hours before she was finally strangled, killed, and dumped into a river. And I'm sorry, this bitch can sit here and talk about how this bipartisan border bill that was so important, yet right at the beginning of the clip you can hear talk about how the policy mentioned in the bill, which by the way, that wasn't even what most of the bill was about. It had nothing to do with immigration at all, or it had nothing to do with the border at all. It had to do with how to handle immigration and essentially making it a more efficient process, so it's streamlined and can be controlled more efficiently. That was all it was about. Not to mention the fact that there's this provision in there, and what's mentioned here, I'll make it clear, at the point that we reach 5,000 immigrants a day, which by the way, it's been recently, before they started hiding the numbers with the CBP1 app and kind of not just allowing people all to come in through the ports of entry, we were reaching numbers over 10,000, usually on, well, in some cases around 12,000 people a day crossing the border. Now, this bill, this bipartisan border bill that was so bipartisan that it literally was one Republican from the Senate who was negotiating with a handful of Democrats, and by handful I mean it was officially 3, which included the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. So I would say there was already a little bit of kind of an unfair advantage there, but at the same time they also were bringing in the president, and they were bringing in members of his cabinet and different other people to be part of these discussions. And the whole point of the bill originally was that they wanted to send more money to Ukraine the Democrats wanted to send more money to Ukraine. The Republicans obviously we need to be more responsible with our finances, and we need to stop sending all this money to Ukraine. But this deal on the border, it's getting so out of control. We need to figure out some way to put a stop to this. Let's put in a provision in the next. This was intended to be part of the bill for to add to the bill that they were using to send the funds to Ukraine. The assistance money was supposed to be tied to a policy that would secure the border, and I'm sure they had something in mind that was similar. Once again, to things like Remain in Mexico or the Safe Third Countries Act or things like that, to make sure that we're not just releasing people into the country without knowing anything about them. And maybe, if it's not a wall, at the bare minimum, start just deporting people again in larger numbers or whatever it takes. This one senator, which, let me just make it clear, the guy who was on the side of the conservatives, Senator Langford, he's a senator from Oklahoma, pretty decent guy. He's a Republican. He's not particularly a really assertive guy. He's a very principled guy, but he's by no means like a senior member of the Senate. He's not somebody with a lot of pull in terms of the structure there. And I think what happened was essentially he just got overwhelmed by the situation he was in and didn't know any way to handle it, because as time's passing, everybody's asking, where's this bill, which, by the way, the other thing that makes this ridiculous is that the deal was that they were supposed to be working on this behind closed doors. Well, the Democrats were talking to each other about what was being done in each meeting to discuss the bill. That they were kind of discussing amongst themselves what we should have, what we shouldn't have. And even if, some people on the Republican side were talking about this, there probably weren't enough details that were known, because the Democrats were going to keep things hidden until very late into the process, that they would only they would know. And they'd be kind of just going along with this and that and this and that. And the entire Republican Party as a whole, and Republican senators as a whole, had no idea what was in the bill until the text had been released and it was ready to go to the floor. Now, once again, here's the issue. They do this all the time with financial appropriations bills, meaning how they're going to fund the government for another year. They don't tell anybody what's in the bill. They don't debate anything that's in the bill. They don't allow amendments. They don't allow any kind of alternate text to be added or taken out. They put this out and they say, well, you're either going to pass it or not. But if you don't pass it, then we're not going to be able to fund the government. The government's going to shut down, and it's going to be the Republicans' fault because they voted no. And so that's usually what happens with the appropriations bills. But what happened with this bill was that they basically were like, well, if Republicans want to close the border, well, here we're willing to take these steps to secure the border. And they don't tell you that it lets in 5,000 people a day without any kind of action whatsoever required from anybody. And it also doesn't tell you that when it reaches 5,000, and this is the most ridiculous, it gives permission for the president to decide if he wants to. I believe it says the president may call for a complete closure of the border. So it's not even like he has to. It's that he may decide to do so. And so it's basically the same situation we're in now, where even worse, though. Like, and I think one of the reasons was they were intending to make it so that when we got to this year, if Trump got elected and they passed this abomination, then Trump would kind of be stuck letting in 5,000 people until he could actually say no more. We're getting you stop now. I think that was kind of what was hoped was going to be the end result, because they're just going to go along with this just to get something passed. But it's like no, and once again, James Langford, the Republican senator, I feel so bad for the guy, because he's always been a guy pretty devoted to just some very basic core principles. He's never been somebody who's been a radical about anything. He's a pretty straight shooter on everything else. They just put him in a shitty position, and actually, what's his name? McConnell was the one who assigned him for it, and I don't always really agree with Mitch McConnell by any means, but I think that his choice at the time, it made sense, because Langford was not only a guy who wasn't a controversial senator by any means, but he was also somebody who had no issue with reaching across the aisle and having some sort of relationship with Democrats when they needed to work on something that was necessary to have bipartisan support. Well, it kind of backfired, because they just, did the Democrat bait and switch of like, yeah, we'll work on this together, and then, the text comes out, it's like, oh, yeah, no, this isn't at all what we had in mind. And the most sick and disgusting part of all of this is that they use this as an excuse as to why nothing's happened yet. They use this bill and parade around the idea about how many people have been murdered, or how much fentanyl is made into the country, or how many people have been burglarized, how many women have been raped, how many children have been raped, how many children have disappeared and are working jobs in factories late at night, or working, or not even working, but stuck in sex trafficking because of this open border. They don't care. They care that they're getting people in who will feel obligated to vote for Democrats because they are the ones that let them into the country. And now their talking point is the only reason it didn't pass is because Trump told them not to pass the bill because it would be a good point for him to run on in the election. Well, if you actually know the chain of events, people like Ted Cruz, people like Ron Johnson, people like Mike Lee, and you could look this up. I've seen all the discussion myself. It's Senator Kennedy. All these people came out immediately after this bill came out and said, "No, this is a ridiculous bill. This is nothing at all like we had in mind. This isn't going to do anything to stop the problem. Don't vote for this bill. It's not going to help the border situation one iota." Trump afterwards makes a post on Truth Social about how this bill is ridiculous. The same basic concept, but that in his own words, and saying that Congress definitely shouldn't pass this bill. Then all of a sudden, because of that statement, they say it's because Trump told them not to vote for it that they all did. So they didn't care about the border. They just did this to make sure that Trump could have a point to his campaign to run on. It's like, first of all, he's got way more than just the border to run on. He's got the wars you guys started in countries, in 2 different countries, and at bare minimum, who knows, how many other countries could potentially be embroiled in conflict by the end of this actual presidential term. But secondly, no, you're completely wrong. People that had a brain and are conservative in any way looked at this bill. They would have had access to it first anyway, and they said, no, this is not at all what we wanted, and no, we're not going to vote for this. And the cherry on top is that there was a bill passed by the House of Representatives on their side, because the process means that you have to pass a bill on one side and then the other, and then it has to go to the president to sign into law. Well, the House passed a bill called H.R. 2, they reference this a lot, where they made a bill that actually consisted of a lot of the policies that Trump had used, like Safe Third Country, and put that into a bill that would have become law. So it was an actual bill meant to fund Border Patrol, meant to allow them to do their jobs again and not, be required to usher people into the country. And essentially, it passed narrowly, but it passed. It passed the House of Representatives, which means it moves on to Congress, or the Senate next. And then they would take a vote on it. But nope, that's not what happened. Chuck Schumer took the text of H.R. 2, put it in his office, and been sitting in there ever since. No one's ever voted on it. It's never been brought to the floor. No one's discussed it. And the only time it's ever been mentioned has been by left-wing senators, all saying that obviously this bill they knew would never make it past the Senate. It would never pass bipartisan support. Yeah, because you guys don't want to close the border. That's the point. That's why it's not going to ever pass bipartisan support. You want one that passes bipartisan support, do something that actually has a tangible, noticeable effect on slowing or stopping immigration. Don't pass some bill where it's like, oh yeah, 5,000 people, that's all right, but after that, that's maybe enough. If the president decides that's enough. So the fact that they still use this, and still blame it on Trump, that's why it didn't pass when this was one of the most ridiculous bills you could have possibly written at a time where, like I said, a 12-year-old girl was raped, tortured, murdered, and dumped in a lake. Not to mention the other two women who also, one was bludgeoned to death while she was on a run in the morning. The other one, who was on a run in the morning as well, was first sexually assaulted and then murdered as well. And these were people who were repeat offenders in this country. They both had records. They were, all three of them, as a matter of fact. The two men that assaulted Jocelyn Nunger and the two other men that attacked Rachel Morin and Laken Riley. But all the cases, they were people who had been either before a judge and let go, or had been serving a short sentence and then let out. But they're illegal immigrants in the first place. And instead of sending them back to their country of origin, they just go through the judicial process and then they're just released. And nothing happens. And then they finally end up murdering people, and then it's like, oh yeah, this is terrible. I'm sorry, it just really pisses me off. And it really pisses me off when they use this excuse, because like I said, yeah, I'm sure Donald Trump doesn't care at all about the American people, and he's just using the border as a point to, that's why the wall was built and had been, even though Mexico refused to pay for the entire cost of the wall like he had promised they were going to do, they ended up paying for part of it, but they didn't end up paying for the whole thing. But you know what? Who cares? It was more important for us to have a physical barrier, which, by the way, if it was patrolled properly, and Border Patrol had said, they're the ones that had first mentioned the idea of a wall. They're the first ones to mention that our job would be a lot easier if there was a physical barrier between our country and Mexico and the Southern American countries to actually stop people from just strolling across the border. So the Border Patrol were the first ones to be asking for this, and yet they try to pretend like, we respect men and women of Border Patrol. Oh, you do you? Well, that must be why they are at record levels for suicide and PTSD, because they have to watch every day as people are dying and dead in front of them. They find dead bodies on people's property, or just floating down the river or the Rio Grande, and it's just like, it's sick, it's incredibly disgusting, and it's amazing. At some point in history, when historians look back at this time, they're probably going to be confused as hell, and they're not going to understand exactly how things got to this point. But even now, it's hard to always know exactly what the hell is going on. But But you can see it now at the bare minimum. There's a little bit of a silver lining to this, because we've been noticing during this year's election that in the case of elections and the demographics for voting blocks, we've never seen such a large Hispanic turnout for Republicans, and we've never seen, in particular, black men, but even the black vote, go so heavily towards the Republicans. And, as I've said before, legal immigrants are the people who hate illegal immigrants the most, because it's like a slap in the face to them who did it the right way, had to work hard and make sure they had their shit together to know exactly what to do and to respect the laws, to know the language, to be prepared to work and earn a living, buy a home. They had to, have all of this, but they had to have one important thing, and that was drive and two things: drive and ambition. The people who are trying to cross illegally, well, they're just trying to cross because there's a bunch of free stuff. They can stay at a hotel for free. They'll get meals for free. They'll get a cell phone for free. They'll get they can have free abortions. They can. A lot of them don't really care about this, but they are offered at least to have free sex change surgeries under at least in certain states. I know Gavin Newsom is all for that, but and now they've also decided, because voter ID is racist, that they can't in California in particular. The place is so wonderful. Once again, you got Gavin Newsom, who has now made it illegal to ask for voter ID at a voting place, what the hell do you call it? Voting station, or whatever you call them when they're open for actual voting in person. But yeah, now it's illegal to ask for voter ID, because I guess that's an act of, next thing you know, it's not just going to be a racist act, it's going to be an act of domestic terrorism next to ask for a voter ID. So it's insane. It's literally insane, and the only reason I think people are not as forcefully angry about this is that they just don't know, and when they hear it, if they don't hear it in the right circumstances with the right kind of information side by side, it's so incredibly ridiculous they don't believe it. They do not believe that something like this could or would be happening in the United States, and I can understand that, because this is sometimes too crazy to believe, but it's on full display, and there you go, you can see it happening. In fact, early on when this administration started, if you remember, there was a surprisingly blackout and no presence of any kind of footage or reporting that was coming from the facilities near the border, or any information coming out about what was going on. We just knew there was a huge amount of people that were coming and that were potentially trying to cross. Well, when we finally did find out, we saw why, but they really tried for a while to just keep this as secret and under wraps as possible, even though they couldn't keep all the facts from being obviously known to everybody. So people would naturally be curious, and especially one situation early on, Ted Cruz, who he's a senator from Texas, so he's right there next to one of the areas where huge spot for illegal crossings. He went to one of those facilities and came in. He had his cell phone on. He turned on the camera and started filming. Literally, children sleeping on top of each other, because there was no space in these places, and for the kids in cages narrative people that were so against it, they didn't seem to have a problem, because I guess instead of cages now they were just acrylic glass boxes, so they was a little bit easier for them to what's it called, kind of make it look like it wasn't an actual cage, but sorry, now you just look like zoo animals. So I don't know what you're supposed to do, but not long after he pulls out his phone and starts filming, someone from the government or the nonprofit organization at least that was running the camp comes up and immediately starts putting her hands. You can't film in here, sir. You can't film. He's like, I'm a United States senator. I can film in here if I want to. She's like, no, you can't. They were desperately trying to get him to stop, and it was the first glimpse into the world of what was happening, and it's been downhill ever since. So, anyway, there's a couple more. We'll get through these kind of quick and try to wrap this up. So, here we go.
I get it.
There's a lot of people that look back at what you said in 2019 when you first ran for president. And there have been changes, and you've talked about some of them. When it comes to immigration, you supported allowing immigrants in the country illegally to apply for driver's license, to qualify for free tuition at universities, to be enrolled in free health care. Do you still support those things?
Listen, that was 5 years ago, and I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again, and as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before.
If that's the case, you chose a running mate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, who signed those very things into state law. So do you support that?
We are very clear, and I am very clear, as is Tim Walz, that we must support and enforce federal law, and that is exactly what we will do.
So decriminalizing border crossings, like you said in 2019.
I do not believe in decriminalizing border crossings, and I've not done that as vice president. I will not do that as president.
So these are evolutions that you've had.
But let's be very clear. I'm the only person who's running for president who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations.
This is a time when voters, especially here in Pennsylvania, are inundated with commercials and ads. They just want it to stop because it's every commercial. But many of them add noise, but a few of them seem to break through. This particular one from the Trump campaign has gotten a lot of attention.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
So are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you know what, you got to take
during
responsible for what happened
presidency.
in your administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in this presidency.
It's in
so
black and white.
Would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassignment surgeries?
I will follow the law, just as I think Donald Trump would say he did.
You would have a say as president.
Like I said, I think he spent $20 million on those ads, trying to create a sense of fear in the voters.
You said turn the page, Madam Vice President. You were
Okay, just briefly. No, he didn't. There's a reason that the advocates, not even people who are transgender, but the lunatics who go around celebrating LGBTQ rights, everything, and who believe in transitioning children and all that jazz. There's a reason they're behind the Democrats and not the Republicans, and there's a reason they're not voting for Trump. And yeah, Donald Trump. No, not to mention the fact that she seems to not really want to respond to the point that, once again, taxpayer-funded sex change operations. Taxpayer-funded. There's the same kind of situation when it comes to abortion, and the idea that that was never supposed to be something that the government and taxpayer dollars were supposed to be devoted to, because it could be something that people, based on their religious faith, want no part of and will never be using on their own. But when they say that it should be a right for a woman to choose, okay, well then make sure that she has to pay for it, and then they'll say, well, that she could be completely unable to pay for her bill. Well, then maybe she shouldn't be sleeping with everything with a third leg, and you know, if she decides to, maybe she should insist that they wrap that thing. You know, there is some aspect. This isn't just something that magically happens, unless, you know, I'm sure they would make fun of the virgin birth and that is just some stupid story in the Bible. Well, you guys sure as hell make it sound like it's not just some story in the Bible, because apparently, you know, according to you, this just happens, and people just want to force women to carry a pregnancy to term. Well, no, we don't want to force anyone to do anything. We just kind of suggest that you don't, you know, decide to, you know, spend your entire adult life having sex with random people that, you know, you don't even use protection for, and then complain. And when birth control suddenly also encompassed abortion, that was when, you know, the people who were more religious started to just kind of feel like, yeah, this is a little bit too much for us. And I can understand, like, I'm not particularly religious. I'm not an atheist. I'm just I'm not particularly super religious. But I will say that, and I'm sure one day, believe me, I'm sure one day we'll go over my stance on abortion very thoroughly. But for now, I'll just say, right now the ideas behind abortion are so over the top extreme. I can't support anything that's coming from the left. I can't trust anything that's coming from the left regarding abortion. And the Roe v. Wade decision being overturned was frankly, something that was absolutely necessary for this country's constitutional rights to be upheld correctly, and it absolutely needs to be turned back to the states. It's amazing to me that people still believe that overturning Roe v. Wade made abortion illegal, and that what are we gonna do now? We're all gonna die from having back alley abortions. Like, once again, no self-responsibility and no sense of, like, you know, maybe I shouldn't do that. It's like, well, we're all gonna do that because we can't get rid of it. It's like, no. There's even been plans so far as, like, California being one of them, of course, once again, that would allow, if you're from a state that doesn't allow abortion or has restrictions on abortion that you no longer meet the requirements for, California will fly you out at California taxpayer expense to come to California because we don't have any restrictions here. And once again, they hate it when you talk about this, but you know, that means, yeah, all the way up until the moment of birth, you can still have an abortion, and yeah, nothing wrong with that. It's absolutely disgusting. It's despicable, and to sit there and, you know, act like this is going back to the transgender thing, like that it's no big deal for people that have objections, either religious or otherwise, to transitioning people with their own money. Sorry, that's something that the people should have a say in. And if there was some sort of executive action taken that made that happen, oh God. Sorry, no. Least of which prisoners or illegal immigrants. I don't care if it's taxpayer money or not. In that case, I don't see that being something we should do, period. So, anyway, I'm getting a little worked up myself. But let's try to get through the rest of this. Man, I went way over today, but we'll keep this rolling for as long as we have to get these clips done, and we'll go from there.
Were asked on 2 different shows last week what, if anything, you would do differently than President Biden. Here's what you said.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be, and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I noticed.
And so that would be one change in terms of But also, I think it's important to say with 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump.
So you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. That is about turning the page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Brett.
More than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade,
But
people
you're the
have
lever of
become,
power.
but listen, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you,
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy.
Yeah. You called Donald Trump, he's...
Okay, real quick, I just got to interject because this one is probably the most egregious in this whole situation, that last statement right there. Which, by the way, you caught a glimpse of it right there as we viewed by conservative perspective. Go check out his YouTube channel, really good channel, very highly recommended. He talks about a whole range of subjects and has a very different angle than mine, but I always love checking out his stuff because I love his approach to the way he makes his stuff. Anyway, so there's a reason why this one's particularly egregious. So he wants to use the military against average citizens. Huh? He wants to use it on people who peacefully protest, and he wants to go after his political opponents. Well, not only have I never heard those words, not only have I never heard him say anything like that, maybe he said something like that about either A, the people who were destroying the cities where they were, fiery but mostly peaceful protests, meaning they were burning the cities to the ground and, they still have several areas in Minnesota where the police precinct still is burned to the ground and has never been rebuilt. The area where George Floyd was killed in the area, now that's turned into basically the equivalent of the Chaz and Chop block garbage piece of dumbass whatever idea it was. Although nobody's really there anymore, it's just boarded up buildings, boarded up businesses, and it looks like something out of some sort of post-apocalyptic game. But it's incredible to me that there's that. Okay, maybe those people, or maybe the people who were out literally breaking the law by picketing outside a judge's home while they're trying to make a decision on the Dobbs case, which they damn well knew at that point because some jackass who was knowingly breaking the law and knowingly breaking the code of judicial conduct that had been handed down for since this country's inception. That you know, opinions from justices don't get released until the final decision's been made. Someone released an early opinion for the decision, and all of a sudden people knew that there was a strong leaning in the Supreme Court for the decision to go away in the way of overturning Roe v. Wade, and that inspired a bunch of people to find out the addresses of, in particular, Trump's nominated justices, but really all the justices that were considered right-wing and that would be voting against Roe v. Wade. And people are all out there, you know, making a shit ton of noise and picketing in front of them. They found out the address of their children. They found out the address of their churches. They found out, like, all this personal information about the justices and were following them around. And that also inspired that lunatic to drive from California to the house of Brett Kavanaugh to attempt to assassinate him. Maybe he would have, actually used the DOJ to actually arrest those people, since they're literally breaking the law. But that's because it's against the law. I don't think there's any other case he would have ever, done anything like she's suggesting. Meanwhile, let's see what's happened during this campaign or this administration. Well, they've attempted to find anybody by any means necessary who was even in the vicinity of the Capitol during January 6th. They've also used a sort of database check of anybody with using, cell phone towers to find geometric data on people who were there. Anybody at the Capitol building who was there from the days between January 5th and January 7th, and they also did a check to see of any of those people that were there, had any of them in the course of their entire lifetime ever applied and received, or even just applied for a firearm for a background check for a firearm. And needless to say, that is quite the invasion of privacy. But once again, they've gone and questioned grandmothers. They've gone and questioned former military. They don't care who it is. They've had the FBI go in and question all these people, and even people that did nothing, people that broke nothing, people that fought with no one, and people that wandered around the Capitol that were let in by police officers who opened the door for them to wander around the building. They've decided that's worth putting people. We need to use every resource we can to find all those people who knows what they did. They probably didn't do much of anything, but let's make sure that they go away. And then we have cases of people who have gone to the D.C. jail and seen the conditions. They're deplorable. There's been people with serious injuries. Some have been done by the staff at the prison. Serious injuries to their body that may never heal correctly. Some of them have been sitting in detention for pretrial for over a year, maybe some of them even longer than that. The most ridiculous cases of people getting these sentences for the most absolutely pathetic reasons. And even cases where one of the most egregious was this older woman who was on several medications for, I believe it was cancer medication, but she had breast cancer, and she was, I think, 69 years old, 70 years old, may have been 78 years old. I can't remember exactly. Anyway, they found her guilty. She was going to have to spend, I think it was 10 months in prison. Because what happened was she got pushed. She didn't actually even voluntarily walk in. She got pushed in through a broken window into the Capitol. One of the Capitol police officers helped her to her feet, said, "Ma'am, you can't be in here." She said, "Oh, okay," and then she walked right back out. Was in there not more than 30 seconds. found her guilty, and she got put in prison. So that kind of throws that part out the window. And then as far as your political enemies, well, I don't know what Trump's going to do. I haven't seen the evidence he's going to do anything, but I have seen this administration throw in prison Steve Bannon. Peter Navarro just served his term in prison. And, you know, even though this isn't exactly the same thing, because he was ending up in prison in a different country, but he knew if he got extradited to the United States, he would die in prison. Julian Assange, who was essentially doing nothing but reporting, like a real reporter should be doing, but because it was unfavorable to the Clinton campaign, they wanted his head on a pike. So I don't want to hear any bullshit again about all the things Donald Trump's going to do to the peaceful protesters and to his political enemies, when during his term not one person was put up in front of a judge that did anything like you would suspect that is going on here, like basically advising the president on what to do in certain situations, and part of their responsibilities, as their job title is describing, people that do that, and they've locked those people up, as well as people that were unarmed. There was no officers killed that day, regardless of what it is you hear on the news. Yet, you know, once again, we know for a fact Ashley Babbitt was shot. There's eyewitness evidence of several other people, at least 2 other people that I've heard of being killed due to the actions of officers that day, mostly National Guard. But you know, nobody is sympathetic at all to those people, because they were insurrectionists and they were trying to overthrow the results of a free and fair election. Now, I think what they're doing is trying to contest the results by demanding a recount, like they've demanded every time a Republican won the presidency, and the congressman and you know, any Democrat House representative or senator, they've been, well, not always senators, but at least several members of the House of Representatives have always demanded that the recount take place, and that the election be suspended, and the certification be suspended, and this and that, and blah, 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 blah. I thought that we were supposed to accept the results of a free and fair election. Oh, well, that's different. That's different, because it wasn't Trump, and it wasn't Putin. Yeah, that's it. It wasn't Putin. Once again, as I said before, there's video of Putin himself saying, I hope that I would prefer Joe Biden to be reelected, which I would assume at this point means that he would also prefer that Kamala Harris be elected. In fact, I think he did reestablish that later after the candidacy was handed off. But if this election doesn't go in the way of the Democrats, if they try to use that one, that would be interesting. But we already know for a fact, I mean, this is even worse, too, that Jamie Raskin, another real piece of work, a real freaking snake, has said that he's going to be voting to not certify the election, and be trying to influence people to make sure that they vote to not certify the election as well. So how's that for democracy in action? This party, I swear, this is dangerous shit. Anyway, I just had to get that out. This is the last segment. We'll conclude on this.
Misguided. You say now
he's
unstable.
He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room. And he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And
but
Donald Trump
But
is,
you talked about it.
And Donald Trump
Actor George Clooney said
and
within a
if
few
you
minutes of
watch
talking to President
Donald
Biden at a
Trump-
fundraiser that he thought this was not the same
Brett,
Joe Biden that we saw on the debate
Donald
stage.
Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump, which is why the people who know him best, including leaders of our national security community, have all spoken out. Even people who worked for him in the Oval Office, worked with him in the Situation Room, and have said he is unfit and dangerous and should never be president of the United States again, including his former vice president, which is why the job was open for him to choose another running mate. So that is a fact. That is a fact.
So you can tell that gets me even a little worked up. But the point is that you can easily tell by just her tone of voice and by the statements she's making, the responses, and how completely unprepared she is to make any kind of statement. That she has no idea what she's talking about. She has no policies that she actually is like informed on, or that she has really any kind of policy for, and it's because she's nothing more than a continuation of what Biden did. Biden wasn't a serious president. He didn't really care about the presidency. He cared about the fact that he would be written down in history as the president of the United States, because he'd wanted that all, what was it, over 50 years that he'd been a senator in Washington and been part of the government. Like, he wanted that job just because of the sort of prestige that comes along with it. And but it was Barack Obama himself that said, never underestimate Joe's ability to fuck things up. And I think people, including even me, I underestimated his ability to fuck things up, because I knew it'd be bad. I had no idea it'd be this bad. And to hear someone like his vice presidential pick, who hasn't done a damn thing in her career, she talks about, I'm a former prosecutor. Yeah, you never sat in on one jury trial. You never were the lead prosecutor on any case in California. There's so much controversy around the decisions that were made, or the cases that she did make priority for prosecutors in the state. It's just all these points that are meant to be like some sort of resume, but when you look at the actions and you look at the results of those actions, there's not one thing you can point to that is like, man, I'm so glad they did that, because nobody's glad that they did anything. Even the people that are supporting her, and this is the most damning statement of all, you can listen to anybody that you hear supporting her, whether you're talking about people on the radio, or usually it's better to just ask the generic everyday citizen, everyday voter on the street, because they're either repeating talking points from the media, which are usually BS, and usually more about Trump than about Harris, or it's because she's a black woman, and that's why we want her. Well, okay, that's what it boils down to now. We want her to be president because she's a black woman. So she could make some of the worst policies in the country's history. She could run the country worse than ever. She could actually oversee the beginning of a World War III that would lead to a nuclear war. But, yeah, that's the person we want in office while that happens. I'm telling you, this is like, I know, I understand people have problems with Trump. I do. I get why. I can totally understand the problems, and I get why people feel that way. However, this is far more important than just your personal feelings about a candidate and his rhetoric. And because, to be honest, if you actually have listened to Trump in this election cycle, most of his rhetoric has been pretty pretty toned down. He's a lot more, well, let's just say the experience seems to have really, really improved his demeanor, his overall views, and it also, most certainly, probably the biggest benefit is that one of the worst aspects of his candidacy last time and his presidency last time was as a guy who was never into politics and never a politician and wasn't from D.C. either. He didn't know anybody. He knew nobody to fill his cabinet up with. He filled up some with, obviously it'd be kind of nepotism, but, people in his family would fill certain roles. But when it came to other people, he had to go on the advice of other people, and sometimes those were okay decisions, and sometimes they led to people like David Frum, who was all about just every day let's drop bombs on this country or that country or whatever, like just a complete warmonger and neocon. And it's like there were bad decisions made because unfortunately there were bad people, and you can make the argument very easily that those are likely people that were recommending those people specifically because they knew they would undermine his presidency. And that's one thing now that he has much better understanding on, and I think that when it comes down to his cabinet choices this time around, like even just the fact that look at who he's working with that we know of: Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Vivek Ramaswamy. Look at the cast of characters here. That is an all-star cast. No matter what party you belong in, it should be very, very comforting to hear a group of people like that. Environmentalists, former members of the military, people who have been leading figures in the fields of AI, of aeronautics and space travel, of pharmaceuticals. I mean, these are people that are so incredibly intelligent and qualified in their own fields, and coming to a cabinet that understands the issues that are there in Washington right now, and this time around has experienced the full-fledged corruption of that place, and knows it firsthand in a very serious way, to not only be coming out of it after attempted assassinations now. From what I've heard, there was a third. I, once again, still haven't heard details about it, but I do know there was apparently a third attempt, and still keep going. The guy is a machine, and to suggest that he's somehow not ready because his mental state can be in any way compared to the guy with oatmeal in his head is just, it's absurd. It's a stupid talking point, and it's just not in any way reflective of reality. Just come out and say you hate the guy's guts. That's fine. I mean, I would prefer that to lies about how he may be he's afraid to release his medical records. When he was presidency, you demanded this, you demanded that. He did it all. He did the cognitive test, he did the physical, he did all of it. Every time it came back as he's healthy as a horse, he's got nothing wrong as far as mental capacity, everything. And I think he's just tired of it. So he's just like, no, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not going to just bow to the whims of the left. Because it doesn't, if I pass, is that going to, no, they're still going to find some reason to say I'm unfit for office for whatever reason. So that's another way he's learned to deal with it, and I'm glad, because you're never going to please those people. But you are going to potentially please people that were open to the idea from the start, that weren't like, Democrats in disguise, or Democrats trying to present themselves as moderates that were pretending like they actually would vote for somebody else. No, these are people that legitimately didn't know who to vote for. And to be honest, it's understandable, especially now with the added stresses of the era of Joe Biden, that there would be reasons why they wouldn't be able to pay attention to those situations. But But as someone who's been paying attention throughout this entire presidency, I can tell you that this has been one of the most destructive and damaging to our national security and our image on the world stage as far as American readiness and it's just everything that this, like, I can't think of anything they've really done that's been an actual success. There may be things that may have softened the blow, but nothing really successful. So anyway, before I go on, because I realize I've gone on a long time this time, much longer than I was planning to. This is much longer than my show's supposed to go on, but I will cut it off there because I got out everything I wanted to get out. And I was late today, so I owed you guys anyway. But I'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully things will go a little bit quicker. Like I said, I apologize for being late again today. There was difficulty getting those clips together, but I'm glad I did because that turned out to be much more, like I said, I thought it'd be much more effective for kind of trying to get across the point of what it is, what happens in these discussions and these debates when Kamala is asked a question, and you can see there wasn't one time she ever answered any question. Not one time. She talked about Donald Trump, like, basically in every question, and she sometimes brought up people that were affected by their policies, but not one time did she ever mention. She mentioned you can get them on her website, but you ask Trump that question, he won't stop talking because he can keep going on and on and on about what his policies are going to be. So I don't think it's ever been this obvious to someone who is open-minded and able to look at information and not be swayed by public attacks against one's character, or especially when it comes to the allegations based on him being a white supremacist, a white nationalist. Look at his record and look at what he's tried to do for minorities and for minority businesses. It's like there's nothing that you could say that would lead any rational person to believe that in some way he just has this deep-rooted and potent and serious problem with white nationalism, white superiority, and it's not there. I've never seen any indication to suggest it is there. So, but regardless, this is one of those times where just actually listen. Don't listen to what the pundits have to say about it. Just listen to the candidates and seriously, because that's been the actual secret ingredient that people have needed to wake them up to. Say, oh, yeah, man, wow. That's why the polls are the way they are right now. Anyway, that'll do it for me. Sorry for going on and on. Sorry for the long video again, but thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really, really appreciate it a ton. As I said, I'll try to get that other link up as well for tips should you be so inclined once again. But what's most important is that to those of you who are here and are able to check out the show, I once again, I can't thank you guys enough. I really appreciate it. I've been overwhelmed by how well the show has done for somebody who has had no presence on Rumble up until the last 4 episodes in the intro video, and so just to have anybody showing up at all has been a huge point of feeling pretty enthusiastic about going on with everything I had planned, and I'm moving a little slow, but even so, it's been very, very awesome so far, and I'm looking forward to the weeks to come. So thanks again, everybody. I will see you guys tomorrow. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a nice afternoon. Peace.
I can't read it. There's no words on it.
Okay. Ready?
Sure. There's no words there. To play us out. What does that mean? To play us out. What is? I don't know what that means. To play us out. What does that mean? To end the show? Yeah. All right, go.